Welcome back to the Talking Shit podcast, presented by Colitis Unfiltered. My name is Frank Tabering, and today I will be talking to Hannah, who got diagnosed with ulcerative colitis at age 16. It's a pleasure for me to have her on the show, and today she's going to share her IBD journey with us. So Hannah, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to chat.
And it's a pleasure for me to have you as well, because based on our sort of conversation before, you've had quite a journey. And this is something that I would actually like to start us off with, to set the context as well. In, a few brief sentences, would you mind just sharing with us a summary of your IBD journey, from diagnosis, but also to today, and how you're feeling today?
Yeah, for sure. So like you said, I was diagnosed at 16, almost 10 years ago now for me. At the time, I wasn't having very many symptoms. I just had some blood in my stool, but my mom has colitis as well. So my doctor wanted to get me an urgent referral. So I had a colonoscopy, and then after that was diagnosed, started taking medication. I was in and out of flares and remission for about 4 years. And then in 2020, I had surgery to remove my colon because of how it progressed. So that was about 5 years ago now. And now I'm feeling pretty good. I still have some flare-ups every now and then. Right now I'm kind of in a mild flare-up, but otherwise I'm doing pretty well.
You were in actual remission for quite some time, and then the symptoms all of a sudden showed back up, or what happened really that you went from remission to sudden sort of flare or setback?
It's kind of hard to say. It was like I would try a medication and it would help for a few months, maybe 6 months. I think the longest remission I had was almost a year. And then it was always kind of sudden. The medication would just stop working for me, and I would be in a bad flare up again and have to do a round of prednisone and switch medications. And then that would work for maybe a few months, and then kind of just repeating the cycle. And then the periods of remission were getting shorter and shorter, and eventually it wasn't even remission. It was like I was still in a flare-up, even after like switching medication and having the prednisone and stuff. So yeah, it just got too severe that nothing was really making any difference.
So yeah, I think that really sets the context of what we're going to talk about today in a little bit more detail. And I kind of always like to start with taking a trip back to the past, and then talk a little bit about the present before we take a look at the future. So if we go back to you at age 16, how did the doctor break the news to you? And also, when you heard that you had ulcerative colitis, what went through your head at that moment?
Yeah, so I think for me, compared to some others who don't have an immediate family member, it was less of a shock because I knew that that symptom that I was having, like the blood in my stool, I knew that that was a pretty big indicator and like most likely was headed in that direction. So mentally, I was like still a little bit prepared going into the colonoscopy. I remember like they put me under for it because I was young. So I don't remember much, but I remember like I was still kind of out of it, but my parents were there and they were showing the pictures from the scope and kind of just explaining everything, and just wanted to start me on medication right away. And I don't think I really said much of anything. And then when we left, I just remember like on the way home, I was just like crying to my parents because I was so scared that I would end up needing to have surgery. Like it was my worst fear. I was terrified of like it progressing and getting worse. So yeah, I was just like, I was prepared, but at the same time, like just hearing it like officially, it still like was a lot to process, I guess.
Yeah. And I think what's maybe a little bit particular about your situation is you told me that your mom has ulcerative colitis as well, right? Was she diagnosed sort of before your birth or later? And
She was actually diagnosed when she was 15, so very similar in the timeline. And her disease progressed really quickly. She had to have emergency surgery when she was 17. So I've kind of like grown up just knowing kind of things that she's been through and like her current struggles. She has a J pouch now, so just, growing up, seeing her every now and then have like a bowel obstruction or not being able to eat certain foods, stuff like that. So I've always kind of been aware and kind of just knew that that might happen to me too.
So basically, when you were diagnosed, like you mentioned, it's not like you didn't know what ulcerative colitis was. I think you've had that sort of reference, right? And did that
Exactly.
sort
Yeah.
of make you feel maybe more at ease, or because a lot of patients that get diagnosed, they might never have heard of it, and there's this
Uh-huh.
sudden panic, right, that erupts. Did you have that same moment, or were you just more on the, for lack of a better word, calmer side when you got your diagnosed because of your experience that you went through with your mom and her colitis?
Yeah, I think it definitely makes a huge difference. Like a lot of people I talked to who were diagnosed didn't know anybody in their family, didn't even know what the disease was, or maybe they've kind of heard of it, but they just think like, oh, it's just a stomach ache, or like, oh, it's similar to IBS, like it's no big deal. But knowing, yeah, like my mom having it and I knew what it was, I kind of like had somewhat of an idea. I think that definitely helped. And also just knowing that she would know a lot about it and like know more about the symptoms and possible like treatments, side effects, kind of all that. And having her by my side, I definitely felt more calm. Like my worries with it were more so about progression and like it getting worse rather than just like the diagnosis itself. Because like we said, it wasn't super random. It didn't kind of come out of nowhere. So
That's interesting. So, because a lot of people who are diagnosed, they sort of have this unknown that they carry with them. And at the same time, they're scared and they feel really alone with this disease as well. So, I guess for you, if we can say the blessing and the curse maybe was that you had somebody on your side to sort of be there with you, right? Through your
for
flares and to
sure.
your
Yeah,
treatments. Yeah, that's great.
for
So
sure.
speaking of treatments, can you take us a little bit through what kind of medications you were on? And I would also like to know if the doctor sort of started you on a traditionally sort of lower medication tier, with like 5-ASAs and then progressed to biologics. What kind of
Mhm.
medications were you on, and how quickly did you sort of climb the tier into the biologic category?
Yeah, so yeah, I've gone through so many treatments. Honestly, like I'll go through them, but I might forget some because I've probably lost count somewhere along the way. But yeah, so the way that the insurance here works, like everything's covered, but you have to start on tier one, like the lowest medications. And those have to not work to be able to kind of progress to the next category. And then again, same thing to progress to the biologics. And when I was first diagnosed, I was considered like mild to moderate. It wasn't yet like the moderate to severe. So they did start me on Mezavant and the 5-ASA, like the enemas and Cortiment, which is like the lower kind of steroid than prednisone. Those were really awful, honestly. I got a lot of side effects from them. The enemas obviously like so painful, so awkward to do. They didn't end up really working, so luckily I only had to do those for about 2 months. Um, but I think it was like 3 or 4 months that I got switched to Imuran, I think.
Hmm.
So another just immunosuppressant, and I was taking that with the Cortiment for a while. I think that one was about a year that it was working, and then my GI was not too satisfied because my inflammatory markers were still like way too high. So they wanted to switch me to biologics, but I was a little bit hesitant on like the self-injection options and all that. And at this point, I was about to go to university, and some of the biologics only worked for like 2 months. One of them didn't work at all. I got, I think, 8 weeks course of treatment, and nothing was happening at all, even with being on the prednisone. So we just switched that one as well. But
You mentioned enemas,
yeah,
and I had to sort of smile a little bit because that was torture for me as well, to the point that I think after trying it for once or twice, I just refused to take them. Luckily for me, they actually, it's bittersweet, but they also didn't work. So I had an excuse to just drop them. But
yeah,
I mean, I'm still having these moments in my head that now I can laugh about, of me just on the floor, with one leg sort of tilted up to my chest, just trying to get
yeah.
this thing in, and it just would not want to. So,
Yeah,
yeah,
that part's painful, and then when you finally get the medication in, that's also painful, and it's like,
yeah,
oh, it's a whole thing.
yeah, absolutely. Now, You said that you moved to university. That meant that you've changed GI as well. Did you have trust in this person and that doctor sort of from the get-go? Was this somebody who was proactive, well-versed in IBD? And how comfortable did you feel with that doctor, and then also going through all these treatments? Was it just sort of like, you blindly follow him or her, you take all the advice, you just say, okay, new treatment, let's go? Or how was that relationship with your GI back then? And maybe how's your relationship with your current GI as well?
So, my GI that I had that initially diagnosed me, she actually knew the GI that she was referring me to. I think maybe either through school or like residency or something, like she knew of him. And then at my first appointment, yeah, he's just really good and like listening to me. And then the practice also had all the GIs paired with a nurse practitioner. So I would be able to email her any questions really quickly without having to call or, get a call back or book an appointment. So that was really helpful. And I think that made me feel secure in that like somebody would be there to kind of help me. So yeah, I think that was good. We had a good relationship. I think the only problem was I was still really hesitant with the self-injectable biologics. And I was young, I was 18. I was in a little bit of a flare-up. It wasn't too bad, but I acted like I wasn't in a flare-up. I was telling him my symptoms were all good because I wanted to keep with the medication instead of switch to biologics. And that was really stupid of me because a few months later, I ended up in the hospital and had to switch anyways. So, I should have been more honest, but it is hard. I think, especially when you're young and for anybody, like it's such intimate symptoms to be kind of like talking about, especially if there is any hesitancy or fear. So I think like making sure you really do have that relationship that you're okay to bring it up.
Hmm.
But also, if you are feeling like that, it's maybe good to bring someone to your appointment with you that can kind of like remind you, like keep on track, be honest, like really just say your fears and stuff. Like they are there to help you. Of course, they want what's best for you, but you might not want that option. So I think it's important to just kind of talk through everything.
Hmm. I think what you mentioned, that's actually a really great tip about sort of having somebody on your side that can hold you accountable. I'm pretty active in the Reddit community as well. And one thing that I really see people struggle is with their doctors, even with GIs that potentially are not super well versed in IBD. And, a lot of people sort of, they don't have the trust in their doctor. And then a lot of the specialists, they really don't seem to be very proactive. And this is why I asked you this question, because I want people to hear that, first of all, there are really good IBD specialists and medical teams out there. And second, it's very important, I think, to also, raise your voice and stand your ground and fight for your symptoms. And so it's very interesting that you mentioned that you actually hid, some details about your symptoms from your doctor, but you yourself said you were young. So maybe to make the transition there, as a 16-year-old, as an 18-year-old, what was it like to live with this disease? Because, I was diagnosed at 29. So for me, I really was never embarrassed to talk about it because it just tore my life apart, essentially, physically and mentally. But I'm
Mm-hmm.
I'm assuming that 16, 18, that young age, it's completely different. So how did you navigate the disease, when you look back as a young adult?
Yeah, so obviously, like I had my mom and her support and her understanding, which is great, but I didn't know anyone around my age who had IBD or had any health concern at all. Like in my friend group and even at my school, like there was not really anybody who would talk about like, oh, they have diabetes or celiac disease or like really anything. So that felt really isolating. And then even when I would have to miss school or, I was doing sports, so sometimes I would have to miss practices and stuff like that, I would tell my diagnosis, but that was usually like the extent of it and not diving into the symptoms because it just felt like, yeah, embarrassing or something that like nobody else talks about or nobody else is going through to understand either. So I definitely feel like it was isolating to be worried and, like, have that fear of kind of judgment or, like, "Oh, I'm the only one going through this, so everyone's gonna be like, 'Oh, what is she talking about?'" Or, just
True.
creating distance from, like, friend groups because I was the only one kind of going through it, and I felt that in university too a little bit at the start, but then I started sharing a little bit more here and there, and what made me kind of end up leaning more on people and that kind of support was just getting back feedback that, like, it's okay, or people would listen with no judgment and empathy, and then I was like, "Okay, maybe it is okay to kind of talk about it more, like, explain more."
Hmm. So what you're saying is, and please correct me if I'm wrong, is that you found your courage to talk about colitis, or you found your voice by seeing people react to you more openly, or what else did you do to sort of, come up to the point where today and you're basically advocating, right? Or you're raising awareness. Was that maybe, was it the surgery, or was there something else sort of that flipped that switch and that made you sort of really comfortable to go out and, fight and shout as an IBD warrior, as we call
Yeah.
ourselves?
Yeah. I think a couple things, like, one, just growing up and getting a little bit older and kind of realizing that not everything really matters, and also if somebody does want to judge who I am as a person from a diagnosis, I probably don't really want them to be in my life in the first place. So that was kind of like a mental switch, and yeah, just having people reacting well because in my mind, I wasn't expecting that accepting reaction.
Hmm.
So it prevented me from, being honest. And then when I did kind of open that door and kind of start letting some stuff out, and they were just really accepting and understanding, it kind of made me realize that, okay, probably a lot of people will take it in a good way. And again, if they don't, that's kind of their problem, not my problem. So that was a big mental shift. And then also, I think the biggest one was the surgery because some of the staff was kind of like very pushy on don't do surgery, keep trying this medication, you're so young, blah, blah, blah. So that was kind of like, yeah, I'm so young, but I'm just struggling to survive. So it was just a kind of a weird narrative. So I was like, other people are so young also going through this. They probably feel the same. I didn't have anyone that I knew around my age when I was in high school. Even joining some like support group things that they have, like Crohn's and Colitis Canada, the age group was mostly older. So again, that was kind of the drive to be like, maybe I should just speak up and share and kind of be the person who I needed to see when I was younger. Just help other people feel less alone because it is so isolating at a young age. So I think the combination, but definitely surgery, it pushed me to get more actively involved. Like I started volunteering and started advocating and like doing more things
Yeah.
because I felt like it almost gave me a purpose.
Two keywords you mentioned, getting older and surgery. And then another thing that I found sort of really surprising is that you were at the hospital and I'm sure you were advised, or it was recommended to you to have the surgery. And you said some staff members advise against surgery. So what was it that made you go ahead with it? Was it really your GI? Was it maybe your mom? Was it just that, you couldn't take the symptoms anymore? Eventually, what led you to make that decision to have the surgery?
So I'm kind of giggling here because nobody actually advised me to have the surgery. Basically, I was in the hospital for a week in March with a flare up, switched medications, was doing great for 2 months, then was in a really bad flare up in the hospital for another week in July. And I was just in a flare up for months and months and months. And then I was on really high dose prednisone. It wasn't doing anything. I was just getting so sick. My symptoms were so bad. I was having a fever every day. I was throwing up. I was going to the bathroom like literally constantly. I could barely leave the house and I was so weak and all that stuff, right? So I landed in the hospital again in October. And this time, like, I was just getting so much worse. They had me on all these different medications, had to be on TPN because I wasn't absorbing anything. I could barely eat. Um, and it was my mom. She was the one who first sat me down and she was like, I know you might not want to hear this, but like, have you considered that maybe it's time to have surgery? And I was like, I don't know. Like, I'm scared. I don't know how life's going to be, whatever, whatever. So she obviously had had the surgery. So, she kind of gave me her perspective on that. And then we kind of came up with a list of pros and cons for me personally to do it. And the list of pros was much significantly longer than the cons. So basically, my mom and I are the one who brought that up to my GI doctor. He like came in to do rounds or whatever. And I was like, I think I want to get surgery. And he was the first person who said to me, are you sure? Like, you're pretty young. I don't want to have to give you a stoma. You should be out enjoying your life, not worrying about surgery. And then I was like, you're very right. I should be out enjoying my life, but I've literally lost this entire year to colitis. Like, I've been in and out of the hospital. I've been so sick, haven't been able to do anything with friends or family. Like, I'm so done. I can't keep doing this. And his potential solution was to try another medication that might work in 3 to 4 months. And I really truly did not think I had 3 to 4 months. I was rapidly losing weight. Like, I was just skin and bones. I could barely have the strength to like stand up and walk around. And it was just really bad. And I wanted to get out of the hospital. I was already there for a week and a bit and just torturous in the hospital, as I'm sure you know. So I really wanted to get out of the hospital. And I didn't think that that would be possible without surgery. So basically, he had a stoma nurse come talk to me and like, do an assessment, kind of explain things, make sure that I was like mentally knew what I was getting into, I guess. And then he came back and I was like, yeah, I really still don't want my intestine. Like, please take it out. I actually, like, I need you to take it out. I was basically begging at this point, which very interesting because that was always my worst fear when I was first diagnosed. And now I was at the point where I just like, I could not take it anymore. I'd already been through so many medications. And it was like, even if this does work for a bit, it probably won't work forever. I just had that perspective because everything else had failed.
Was it just one surgery? Take us through a little bit of the time of how that happened.
So when I first, told the surgeon, like, I need you to do this, and he finally agreed, he was talking through everything with me, and he's like, okay, perfect. So, like, in 3 months, you can come back and we can create the internal pouch. And then 3 months after that, you can have it reconnected and you'll have a J pouch and whatever. And at the time, I was in my third year of university. And luckily, like, it was all online school at this point because of COVID. So I was still doing school in the hospital. So I was like so determined. I was like, I do not want to be a year behind. Like, I still want to graduate with my friends. I was so determined. But I was only able to do that because everything was online. But, anyways, so I told him, like, I at least want to finish my third year before getting like 2 more surgeries. So I'm definitely not doing that in the next year. And he was like, okay, no worries. We can do a follow up in the summer, like when you're on your summer break, and talk more about those other 2 surgeries. So that summer came and went. I got a research job at my university, so I never went home that summer. So I never had that second talk. But as time went on, I kept thinking about, do I do the surgery? Do I not do the surgery? And like I said, seeing my mom growing up with her J pouch, like certain struggles of still needing to be near a bathroom for, like, you can go on some trips and stuff, but it's still kind of there. There's still some level of urgency because it's not like you have perfect function, and just the risk of like the blockages and the scar tissue and somewhat of a decreased diet and stuff like that. And then I looked at myself and I really didn't have any of those issues. I could eat. I still do eat essentially everything. I don't always need to worry about like being near a bathroom at all times. So I started thinking more and more about maybe just never doing the surgery. And for me, like, the urgency piece was one of the worst symptoms, especially like mentally, because I would always have to be thinking about it, always worried, like, can I go do this activity? Will there be a bathroom there? All that stuff. Then I just was like, maybe I just will never do it, but we'll see, because my surgeon had told me even if I want, I could do it like 5-10 years from the surgery. So then more recently, I had a scope of like the rectal stump that is still there holding the spot for the pouch. And it is covered in scar tissue, really inflamed. Apparently, actually, a scope 3 years ago, I was diagnosed with divergent proctitis, but they never told me. They told me it was slightly inflamed, but still normal. And they never gave me any medication or any follow-up. So then earlier this year when they were like, "Oh yeah, like how have you been treating your divergent proctitis?" I was like, "My what?" Like I had no idea. But anyways, long story short, they don't think a J pouch would even be successful anymore because of everything going on down there. But thank God I already came to that conclusion myself, because imagine this whole time I was like, "Oh, it's fine. I'll have the J pouch surgery soon, like whatever." And then I wasn't able to. So at least that is the only good side of them not telling me. But yeah, so I only had the one surgery. I'm not gonna have the J pouch. I might have to have the like rectum taken out and sewn up, like the Barbie surgery or whatever. But it's not really like urgent or something that is planned in the near future.
Hmm. Some people, they think that, hey, I have my colon taken out. My colitis is cured, I will never feel anything again. But that's not always the case. So can you just take us through your life right now,
For
and also how it is going symptom wise, and if so, how are you navigating that?
For sure, yeah. That's honestly a misconception that I myself had at the start, especially because after the surgery, I felt like a million times healthier. Like all those other symptoms, like the pain and the not being able to eat and the weight loss, like I could eat again. I was gaining weight back. Physically, I was feeling better. And I wasn't having any symptoms at all for quite some time, like 2, maybe even 3 years. And then recently, some of those kind of like extra intestinal manifestations of the IBD have showed up a lot more. And yeah, when my doctor was like, "Oh, it might be your IBD," I was like, "But I don't have my colon." She's like, "Yeah, you still have IBD." And I was like, "Why did nobody tell me this?" Yeah, so this year has been kind of a lot of up and down with the symptoms. Mostly like joint pain is kind of become the most significant one. And it really sucks because sometimes I feel like I'm 80 years old and I'm like, I'm so
Mm.
young to be having like all these different joint pain problems. But again, it goes back to the whole thing. Like a lot of people just think, oh, it's a stomach ache. Like, you have some digestion problems and that's it. But it's truly like so much more than that. I think joint pain is really like the main one. But like I haven't had any problems with like my skin or eyes or kidneys, but like that's another root that people can have some like issues with. So yeah.
Mm. So a journey that is not approaching the end quite yet, right? So yeah, I see. Now reflecting back on the time that you were diagnosed, all the flaring, even the surgery, how has this disease changed you as a person?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, I think personally I was always like really on the empathetic side even as a kid. Like I would see somebody going through something or even just looking a little bit sad and I would always kind of like feel that myself for them. But I think definitely has just really changed my perspective and made me even more like empathetic or understanding, I guess, especially because with things like colitis and other autoimmune kind of things, the majority of it is very much invisible. And so from the outside, you can't really ever see what's going on. And the amount of times I've had people say, like, "Oh, but you don't look sick," or "Oh, you look fine," or even like saying that they wish that they couldn't gain weight or that they would lose weight like how I was, even though like that was not my goal. I was super unhealthy, but from the outside, they're just like assuming something that isn't true. So I think that has really changed. Like, I never try and give someone a story until I hear their story. I never try to assume because you really never know what's going on behind the scenes for anybody. Even like if someone's having a really bad day or someone's just like so rude to me, I always try and still pause and be like, okay, it's probably nothing to do with me. They're probably going through something on their own. Like everybody has their thing. So I think patience and understanding is probably like the biggest one.
You earlier talked about misconception in regards to IBD. So, in your mind, what are some other misconceptions about colitis or IBD that are common?
Yeah. So I know I touched on this one already, but just the idea that it's kind of only the stomach or like, oh, it's the same as IBS. You're only like poor digestion or stomach aches kind of thing, but it's really again whole body. It can affect everything, every aspect. That's a big one. And then I think one that I keep seeing more frequently now that like social media is such a big thing is a lot of people kind of assuming or sharing that you can just cure your colitis if you just change your diet or if you just do this one quick fix or you just exercise more or, all these things. And that's not to say diet, lifestyle, stress, all those things are very important. They can help you stay in remission, or opposite, if it's bad, they can make a flare come. But the thing with colitis is it is chronic. Like even me, I don't have my colon. I still have colitis. So it kind of, it's one of those things where it's like people maybe are assuming that it's more in their control than it actually is. All those things can help and make a difference, but even if you're in remission for years and years and you're doing everything absolutely perfectly right, all your diet, all your exercise, you could end up in a flare up randomly at any point. And I think that's part of the missing piece. When people talk about it, they're like, oh, I healed my symptoms because I changed my diet, and that's great. But you can still have a flare up at any time, at any point. So that's a big one. Like it is for life. And also, I've seen this kind of discourse that colitis is less severe than Crohn's. And Crohn's is everywhere, like throat, stomach, small intestine, large intestine, mouth. So you can have a lot of problems with that. But to say that it's necessarily worse is not always true because you can have mild Crohn's, but you could have severe colitis and you could be way more sick with severe colitis, right? So it just really depends. Like everyone's different.
Yeah, yeah. So we agree then that switching to a kale smoothie diet is definitely not going to cure your colitis, right?
Oh, I agree with you on
Good.
that one. Yes.
Okay, great. So you've had great support, from your mom, and I'm assuming she was probably the central support person that you could rely on during your journey with IBD. But as you also kind of mentioned, a lot of people don't really know what this disease is, what this disease does. And so it can be very difficult for people that are not going through the same things that we're going through to talk about it, but also to react appropriately in regards to us, right? Or their loved ones, their friends. So, what words of advice do you have for friends and family of someone with IBD?
I think a really big one is to do research on your own because it can become very exhausting to continuously have to explain and re explain what diagnosis you have, what it is, what it means, what treatment they can do for it, what the symptoms are, all those things, right? And of course, like it's okay to ask questions to your friend or family who has it to kind of gain a better understanding, but it's really nice when people kind of do a little bit of their own research to kind of just gain a better understanding in general, especially with some of those symptoms that maybe people won't be so forthcoming with. Then you can kind of better understand and just really like listening without judgment and being able to be okay and like be adaptable with change of plans or, you know, canceling plans, things like that, because it can seem like when you're going through a flare, like, "Oh, I'm the problem, like, I'm always sick, I can't do all these things," but really, it's not like you asked to be in a flare, so if your friends and family can be, like, validating and supporting, like, "It's totally okay, it's not your fault, like, we can do something else, or we can do it, like, next time," that is very helpful because when you're sick, sometimes you really don't know what you need or what you want, but just, like, understanding and compassion, like, go a really long way.
It's very interesting that you mentioned doing research on your own, especially if you're someone who doesn't have the disease, but you either live with someone or you care for someone that has the disease. And if I may build on that, I think you're absolutely right. Do research, but be careful to not take that research and then potentially sort of bombard the person, with IBD, with what you've learned. I think it's more about
For sure,
do the
yeah.
research, but for yourself, right? So that
Yes, that's a
you
great point,
can
yeah.
somehow relate to it, even though
Mhm.
you'll never be able to sort of feel the same things that we feel. Because I think there's a danger, of course, that then, it can become patronizing very quickly. But I totally agree with your point that I think that's a great way to get an onboarding, onto
Yeah.
IBD and then be able to at least to some extent understand what the person that you're caring for is actually going through, So,
Yeah, for sure.
yeah,
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 definitely a good
it's
point,
great.
like,
Yeah.
more research just to understand on your own, especially if they're not
Mm,
sharing, like, every single symptom they go through or all the things like that, or even
yeah.
just medication side effects, like, just so you can kind of gain a little bit of perspective, but yeah, not like, "Oh my god, I learned this. What about this? Are you okay with this?" So, yeah, that's a good point.
If you could speak to yourself at age 16, on the day of your diagnosis or shortly after the diagnosis, what would you tell yourself?
That's a good question because there's so many things you could say. I think the main thing I would say is, like, you're gonna get through it, like, you'll be okay. It might seem like you're not gonna be okay, especially at certain times when you're sick and you're missing out on everything and you don't feel like you're living, you're just surviving, but, like, you're gonna get through it, you'll be okay. You just have to keep going, even if it feels like you're going nowhere, just keep going. And then to kind of go back to the whole relationship with your GI, um, just being more comfortable with being open and honest, like, I think that has such an emotional and mental health aspect that I could have really used when I was younger, so I think that would be something that I would kind of bring up to younger me.
So my last question then is looking into the future, and even though I know it's a very hard one to answer, I do believe that everybody has at least some sort of hope or feeling about this. Do you think we'll see a cure for IBD during our lifetime?
Like you said, it is hard to answer, but I really do feel hopeful that we will. There's been quite a few recent kind of discoveries about IBD in the news and in the research world. And even now, like, you'll see a new medication kind of come forward to the market. So I think the possibility is really high and it's getting higher and higher. Crohn's and colitis is really increasing in the modern world in our day and age. So I really do feel hopeful. I would honestly be more surprised if there wasn't at some point.
I'm completely with you. I'm not really sure this might happen in the next, 5 to 10 years, but I do believe that, we are getting closer to finding a more permanent relief for people that don't necessarily involve, biologics or continuous periods of remission and flaring and going back and forth. So I'm
Mhm.
hopeful as well. So, and this is exactly how we want to end with hope and sort of a positive outlook for the future, not just for us, but also everybody else who
Mhm.
is facing IBD. So, Hannah, this was an absolutely fascinating conversation, and I want to thank you very, very much for being here today and talking to me. I think the world needs more IBD warriors like you, and I'm very happy that you're so outspoken about it. And I encourage you to continue doing that because I do believe that we are helping other people who have been recently diagnosed or who are living with this disease for a long time to get through tougher times or periods where they feel isolated or embarrassed. So
Mhm.
I think what we're doing is very, very important, and we need to keep doing this. So
I
thank you so much for what
absolutely
you
agree.
do,
Yeah,
and
thank you
I,
so
I
much.
and I really appreciate you being here. And I'm going to sign off then with saying I wish you the best of luck, and I hope that you are able to find a way or remedies for your current symptoms. And other than that, keep enjoying that life with IBD, and all
Yeah,
the best.
thank you so much. Thanks for having me. It was great.
Thank you as well. That's it for today's episode of Talking Shit, presented by Colitis Unfiltered. I'm Frank Tabering, and if this hit home or hit your gut, do us a favor, subscribe to the show, and follow us at Colitis Unfiltered on YouTube, Substack, Instagram, Threads, TikTok, and Reddit. We'll see you soon for more inspiring stories from the bathroom floor.